Okay, so picture this, right? Like imagine a hedge fund guy, a big one, known for betting against currencies, and he gets picked, get this, to be the US Treasury Secretary.
Wow.
It's wild, right? It's exactly what we're going to be getting into today with President-elect Trump's pick, Scott Bessent.
Yeah, for a lot of people, this is a total surprise. I mean, especially if you think about Bessent's ties to Soros. That's not a name you usually hear in Republican circles.
No kidding. It's definitely eyebrow-raising, for sure. So we've been digging through articles about Bessent's career, his economic thinking, what this all might mean for the economy.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is. But before we even go there, maybe we should start with, who IS this guy?
Right, right. Well, I'll tell you, his career path is not what you'd expect. He went to Yale thinking he'd be, get this, a journalist.
No way! A journalist turned finance whiz. What happened?
Well, he didn't get the editor spot at the Yale Daily News. Instead, he ended up interning with, of all people, Jim Rogers, Soros' first partner. Yeah, and apparently Bessent was so determined, he even slept on the office couch to make it work. That internship basically launched him into this whole hedge fund world.
Wow, so from a couch to, high finance, that's quite the journey.
Oh, absolutely. And it gets even wilder when you look at that yen bet he made. Almost $1 billion profit.
Yeah.
That takes some serious guts going against the grain like that.
It really does. So now he's CEO of Key Square Capital Management, taught at Yale. I mean, the guy clearly knows his stuff.
No doubt about it.
But what about his views on the economy, the big picture stuff?
Okay, so that's where things get really interesting. Bessent, he's got some strong opinions, particularly when it comes to globalization and, the gap between the rich and the poor. He sees a connection there.
I can see that.
And this is what leads to his, let's call it, controversial stance. He's pro-tariffs.
Wait, hold on. Pro-tariffs, isn't that, economic blasphemy? I mean, most economists, even those Nobel Prize winners, they warn against tariffs. Doesn't that just hurt regular people with higher prices?
Yeah, that's the common thinking for sure. But Bessent, he actually challenges that. He's got this whole argument, even wrote about it in a Fox News piece, saying tariffs can actually be good for the U.S. economy.
Really?
Yeah, he claims those tariffs Trump put in place during his first term, they didn't cause the huge price hikes everyone predicted. He even says they helped American jobs and industries.
So he's going against the flow here. What's his logic, though? What's he basing this on?
Well, he uses historical examples of tariffs being used strategically, like to help certain industries grow within a country. He's saying that in today's global economy, tariffs can level the playing field. He even has data, points to specific sectors where, according to him, tariffs actually helped create jobs and boosted growth.
Interesting. So he's not just saying this, he's got evidence to back it up.
That's what he claims, yes.
Okay, well, I'll have to dig into that more for sure. But speaking of shaking things up, what about his advice to President-elect Trump, this 3-3-3 plan, right? Is that even realistic?
Ah, yes, the 3-3-3. It's bold, I'll give him that. 3 major things. Slash the budget deficit to 3% of GDP by 2028. Get GDP growth to 3% by cutting back on regulations. And then increase oil production an extra 3 million barrels a day. He's all about energy independence.
Wow, okay, 3 is definitely his lucky number, I guess. But, I mean, some experts are saying all 3 at the same time. That's a tall order, especially with how the economy is right now.
Yeah, it's definitely something people are debating. Critics are saying that cutting the deficit and boosting growth, those two things can clash. And with the oil production, that needs tons of investment. Infrastructure takes time,
Yeah. No, totally. So it's a big gamble, for sure. What could go wrong if this 3-3-3 doesn't work out?
Well, if that deficit doesn't shrink, we might have to borrow more. And that could mean higher interest rates for everyone on mortgages, loans, everything. And if the GDP doesn't grow like he's hoping, that could mean fewer jobs, a stagnant economy.
Right.
And then, if we don't pump up that oil production, well, we're stuck with whatever happens to global oil prices. We'd still depend on foreign oil, basically.
So a lot riding on this, to say the least.
Absolutely.
Wow.
It's a lot to think about, for sure. It makes you wonder, what kind of Treasury Secretary would Bessent actually be? I mean, to figure that, we need to understand what the job even is.
Right. Good point. Okay, so remind me then, what does the Treasury Secretary do exactly? What's their day-to-day like?
Well, you can kind of think of him like the CEO of the U.S. economy. Basically, they're the ones advising the president on all things economic and tax-related. They're in charge of managing the public debt, which is a huge GE job, considering where our finances are at right now.
Yeah, no kidding. Especially with all this talk about spending cuts and tax reform. So what else is on their to-do list?
Well, the Treasury Secretary oversees the IRS, So they're basically responsible for making sure the government actually has the money it needs to, function. That means collecting taxes, enforcing tax laws, making sure the whole system runs smoothly.
So they're not just giving advice, they're actually making things happen through the IRS. I get it. But the Treasury isn't just a domestic thing, right? What about their role globally?
You're right. They're super important in international finance, too. They represent the U.S. when dealing with, like, the IMF and the World Bank.
Hmm.
They're involved in negotiating trade deals, coordinating economic policies with other countries, and basically navigating that whole global financial system.
So they're not just the CEO of the U.S. economy, they're a major player on the world stage, too. Sounds like one of the most important jobs out there.
It's definitely up there, for sure. Their decisions have ripple effects that can be felt across the U.S. and around the world. And get this, they even oversee the printing of money.
Wait, seriously, they decide how much cash gets printed.
Well, not exactly. The Federal Reserve sets monetary policy and decides the overall money supply, but the Treasury Department actually makes the physical currency.
Hmm.
The bills and coins we use every day.
Yeah.
The Secretary's signature is even on those bills.
Wow, I never knew that. So every dollar I have in my wallet has been touched by the Treasury Secretary in some way.
In a way, yeah. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. They also manage those big entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare. Those impact millions of Americans.
So it's high finance, global economics, and social safety net all at once. That's a pretty diverse job.
It is. They need to know a lot about economics, finance, law, and policy. They have to be a good negotiator, a strategic thinker, and a strong leader.
So given all that, what could Scott Bessent bring to the table? Could his hedge fund experience be a good thing, or will his lack of government experience hurt him?
Well, that's where his background gets really interesting. His years in hedge funds, especially at Soros Fund Management, exposed him to a ton of different financial strategies and instruments. He's used to making high-pressure decisions with a lot on the line, which could be really helpful in managing the U.S. economy.
Yeah, he's clearly not afraid to take risks, and we know he's willing to go against the grain, especially when it comes to tariffs and globalization. But some people worry that his hedge fund experience might make him too focused on short-term profits instead of long-term stability. What do you think about that?
It's a valid concern for sure. Hedge funds are known for their aggressive investing and focus on profits. But Bessent has also shown a commitment to fiscal responsibility, like with his 333 plan. He wants to reduce the national debt.
That's true. And teaching at Yale shows he's got a good foundation in economic theory and history that could help him make better policy decisions.
Exactly. He's not just some Wall Street guy. He's got intellectual depth.
So we've got this mix of strengths and potential weaknesses. How do you think it'll all play out if he actually becomes Treasury Secretary?
It's tough to say for sure. But what's really fascinating here is that Bessent's appointment is totally different from what we usually see. Treasury secretaries usually come from government or academia.
Yeah, you're right. It's typically someone with a long history of public service or deep experience in economic policymaking. Bessent is a total wild card.
Exactly. And that makes things even more interesting. Will he be able to use his financial expertise and unconventional thinking to help the U.S. economy? Or will his lack of government experience and those unorthodox views lead to mistakes?
Those are the big questions, aren't they? And the answers will affect not just the U.S., but the global economy, too.
Absolutely. Scott Bessent's potential impact as Treasury Secretary is a story that's just getting started, and it's one we'll be watching very closely.
Now that you mention it, I can see how there might be some clashes. He's coming from a world that's very different from the culture at the Treasury Department. It's full of career civil servants who are used to doing things a certain way.
Exactly. And those civil servants are the ones who keep things running. They implement policies, manage the day-to-day stuff, and provide all that institutional knowledge. If Bessent doesn't have him on his side, it can be tough for him to get anything done.
So it's not just about politics, it's about managing those internal dynamics, too. It's like he needs to win over two different groups.
That's a great way to put it. He needs to build relationships both within the administration, A&D within the Treasury Department.
Yeah.
Otherwise, he'll face resistance and roadblocks everywhere he turns.
Okay, so we've got this multi-layered challenge, political opposition, potential internal conflict, and then, of course, the huge task of managing the U.S. economy. It's a lot to handle.
It is. And it raises a big question. How will Bessent approach all of this? Will he try to be collaborative and build consensus and work within the system? Or will he be more of a disruptor, shaking things up and pushing for fast change?
Yeah, those are two very different ways of leading. And I feel like, which one he chooses will really determine if he succeeds or not as Treasury Secretary.
Oh, absolutely. His leadership style is going to be just as important as his policies. And Speaking of success and failure, we got to talk about the big thing, right? The Soros connection. I mean, how does someone who's basically a Soros protege end up advising a Republican president?
It's a real head scratcher, especially with how different their political views are. I mean, Trump's criticized Soros a lot, but then you hear that he actually admires Soros's business smarts. Maybe, like, practicality wins over politics sometimes, at least in this case.
It's possible. It wouldn't be the first time Trump's put business ahead of, ideology.
Hmm.
But even if he gets the okay from Trump's inner circle, there's still the whole Republican Party. A lot of them, especially the old guard, might not trust Bessent because of Soros.
Right. It could cause some real tension, especially with those Republicans who are like really into traditional economic ideas. So it's like Bessent's walking this tightrope between Wall Street and Washington, trying to keep everyone happy.
Exactly. And we can't forget, this isn't the first time he's had to deal with, like, conflicting loyalties. I mean, he made a fortune for Soros betting against the yen. Some people might say that weakens national currencies.
Oh, yeah. Good point. It makes you think, when you're dealing with trillions of dollars flowing around the world, where does your loyalty lie? That's something Bessent will probably have to face as Treasury Secretary.
Definitely adds another layer to this whole thing. No matter how you look at it, Scott Bessent's story is full of contradictions. He's a tough guy to put in a box.
He really is, and it makes you wonder about his personal life, too. He's openly gay, married to John Freeman, who was a New York City prosecutor. They've got 2 kids.
Yeah, it just shows you diversity is everywhere, even in finance and politics, which can feel pretty, uniform sometimes. And it's interesting. Bessent's personal life hasn't held him back. If anything, it seems like it's given him a wider perspective, made him more well-rounded.
I read an interview where he said, if you had told me in '84, when we graduated Yale and people were dying of AIDS, that 30 years later I'd be legally married, have 2 kids through surrogacy, I wouldn't have believed you.
That's powerful. Shows how much progress has been made, for LGBTQ plus rights and acceptance. But it also shows Bessent's resilience. He's overcome a lot. He's always kind of defied expectations.
He has. It makes you wonder, what keeps him going? What's his end goal? Does he want to leave his mark on the economy, or is it something else entirely?
Maybe it's a mix of things. Wanting to make a difference, challenge the way we think about things, prove that his path, even though it's unusual, can lead to success. Whatever it is, he's not afraid to take risks and shake things up.
Well, we've definitely covered a lot in this deep dive. We looked at Scott Bessent's background, his economic views, how complicated the Treasury Secretary job really is. We talked about the challenges he might face, the politics, the internal stuff, and what might help him succeed.
Yeah, it's been a good overview. Hopefully people listening have a better sense of who Scott Bessent is, what he believes in, and what all this could mean for the U.S. and even the global economy.
Absolutely. And to wrap things up, I want to leave you with one last thought, something to chew on as this whole thing unfolds. We talked a lot about how Bessent might disrupt things, but what if his biggest hurdle isn't the politics or the people, but something even bigger? What if it's just the sheer size of the job itself?
That's a good point. Managing the U.S. economy, that's a massive undertaking. It takes a deep understanding of how economies work, being aware of global trends, and making tough calls under pressure.
Exactly. And those decisions affect millions of people. He's going to have pressure coming from all sides, politicians, businesses, regular Americans. Can he handle that? Can he step up and get results?
That's what will define his time as Treasury Secretary, ultimately. It's not just about being bold or different. It's about being effective. It's about making things better for people.
Well said. I think that's a great place to end our deep dive. We've covered a lot today, but it feels like we've only just scratched the surface.
There's always more to learn, right? I encourage everyone to keep digging into this, to really explore how economics and finance work, and to form their own opinions about Scott Bessent and what he might do.
And remember, the best way to understand what's coming is to understand what's happening now. So stay informed, stay curious, and keep diving deep into the stuff that matters.